Welcome everyone to the 2021 Richmond CA virtual Banquet. I'm all missing our normal fellowship that we usually get to enjoy. For me, it's one of the highlights of the year to get to be with the CMDA family. But I'm thankful that we can still get together tonight virtually. I'm Debbie Reed. I am a nurse. This is my husband, Ed, who's a physician. And we love being involved in CMDA, both locally and nationally. Ed has been a lifetime member for 30 years, and we were blessed to be the Richmond area co-directors from 2003 to 2016. We're still actively involved, participating in the RCMDA local council, and I've led the side-by-side Medical Wives Bible Study group since 2005. We consider it a joy to serve our Lord through CMDA with many of you. For those of you that are not yet involved, I encourage you to consider joining in God's work through CMDA. You'll enjoy the blessing it is of building relationships as we encourage one another in our faith and in our careers. And I know that you will enjoy tonight, and it's a joy to be with you all virtually tonight.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm really looking forward to hearing Far Curlin speak this evening. I first became familiar with him through a journal article that he co-authored back in 2005 entitled Strangers or Friends, A Proposal for a New Spirituality in Medicine Ethic. Then in 2006, I began reading that article with healthcare students and discussing together its implications for addressing the spiritual needs of patients, including the ethics of praying with them. So it was very helpful to the students and to me to have Far's article to really spearhead a discussion that we really needed to have. So before we go any further, let's open with the word of prayer together. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the opportunity to gather together, Lord, at times that are really chaotic and we need to physically distance, and yet you've provided the science and the technology for us to be able to do this virtually. And Lord, we know that we've not been created to be virtually together in relationship, but to be truly together in relationship. So we look forward to the time where we will be able to gather together again and to hug one another and be able to share just times together over a meal. Lord, we ask for your blessing upon this evening and upon the speaker and all the speakers that will share tonight. And Lord, again, we know that you are sovereign and you are in control. So Lord, we just pray all this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It is so great to be with you all, albeit virtually. My name is Crystal Maddox, and I am on staff with the local CMDA Richmond here. And I work very closely with Scott Armistead. So filling the shoes of the Reeds, which is not an easy task by any means, but it has been a joy to work with the students here. So I am going to go ahead and pull up a PowerPoint just to kind of share with you all a little bit of what we've been doing here in Richmond. All right, so let's talk about what's been going on in Richmond. I always like to start out with what is the mission of CMDA? So CMDA nationally educates, encourages, and equips Christian healthcare professionals to glorify God. Christian healthcare professionals glorify God by following Christ, serving with excellence and compassion, caring for all people, and advancing biblical principles of healthcare within the church and throughout the world. And that's a big, mission that we're all involved with. Obviously, we're part of the bigger CMDA, and what we do here locally in Richmond is that we seek to facilitate gatherings for students to fellowship with like-minded peers and with Christian graduate professionals to build relationships that promote growth professionally and personally. And that's also a big task, but it's great to be able to be a part of the ministry, what's going on here. And we do appreciate you all for being a part of the mission. And a lot of that involves what we do with the students. So that's what we're going to talk about briefly. Obviously, we do a lot of other things, and you'll hear a little bit about that from the other individuals I'll be speaking. But my task here, along with Scott, is just to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing with the students. So I'd like to let you know who our student leaders are. So these are some of the students from 2020. Of them have stayed on for this year as well. And I'm just gonna call them by name. They're here too. They can do a little wave emoji so you know who they are. But we do have Jacob serving as the president, and Thomas, who is co-president. He was president last year and has stayed on, and we're excited to have them both. And of course, we have Alexis, who's serving as a co-vice president along with Jerry. And Grace has been serving as a communication chair, and she's been very helpful and engaging as we're sending out information. Jonathan has been helping us with our outreach, and you'll get to see some photos of what we've been able to do. And then Dustin has been instrumental in helping us stay social. In spite of everything that's going on in our society, you know, we thrive on relationships with each other, and it's really important. So, and then we have Haesung, who's really been instrumental in being liaison for residents. So that's some of the team. I do want to share what's occurred in the last year. So for those who were at the banquet last year in March, you know, we talked about different missions that we've been involved with. And if you remember, the next day we were going on a plane to go to El Salvador. And here's some photos from that trip. It was a really great opportunity to serve alongside Ed, who's been going for several years as an ER physician. As well, I went as a dentist, a physical therapy student went as well, Matthew, and then we were able to just be a multidisciplinary team, which was really great. We were able to go into the community. Several people have been on this trip, but it's a really great opportunity for students to be a part of missions. Now, of course, we're in a different era, and you know, we still want to be able to support missions, and that's what we intend to do. And when things are all right, we'll be able to go on more missions. But what I love about Scott is that he won't let anything stop him. So he will always be on mission for the Lord here in Richmond, but also overseas. So I'll turn it over to you, Scott. All right, you're muted. Let me unmute you.
All right. So I would like to offer my welcome as well and say how much a delight it has been since we got back from Pakistan in 2015 to be the area director for CMDA, and particularly over these last couple of years to have Crystal along. It's been a wonderful partnership, and I am so grateful for her friendship and her administrative skills and her connections to CMDA National, because she was a national student leader when she was coming through. So I'm very, very grateful to be a part of this ministry. So I'm working part-time in family medicine at VCU and then part-time as the CMDA staff worker. If you could go to the next slide, Crystal. We also have a weekly Bible study that is one that is carried on. Initially, we did it in person, and then we tried it outside until the weather got cold, and then we moved into the hospital cafeteria, and then we moved on to Zoom. So we've adjusted to the times, but we have done a series from CMDA National on the student app about the Lord's Prayer. And recently we've started one from the book of Daniel called Living in the Lab Without Smelling Like a Cadaver. You can imagine that might be about being a devoted follower of Jesus in the midst of a culture that is not really keen on that, sort of like Daniel's world in ancient Babylon. Other gatherings, this past summer, we had a focus on ethics, and we actually used a lot of the literature from the theology, medicine, and culture program that Dr. Curlin is a part of, and that was very, very helpful. We've had evening meetings twice a month at what we call the CMDA house, which is a house in Churchill that we've connected to. So there are 3 CMDA guys that live there, and we've moved our meetings to that house so it could be a place of both fellowship for students and a place in which to have our meetings. Those meetings have involved discussions about medical ethics, hearing from doctors from the community, like Sina Madison and Danielle Avula. And we are also thankful for those members of the council who have shared food with us, like those masked folks, Ed and Debbie Reed there, with that table full of goodies. Starting this semester, we've decided to meet around the fire pit in our backyard every Friday night, just trying to follow COVID guidelines for both fellowship and friendship and some focused discussion. Next, I'll talk a little bit about service. We've had a relationship with Crossover for some time, and even yesterday afternoon, took a group of 3 first-year students. You can see one of them there in the picture to the left, just joining the work of Crossover, and it's an opportunity to see a different paradigm for how medicine is practiced in a Christian context where prayer and sharing one's faith, caring for the poor is just a part of how it's done. So that's been a real delight, and we hope to carry on with that. I also, and Crystal as well, really enjoy getting together with students for mentorship relationships. Christian formation is a deep interest of mine, and it seems particularly pertinent because of just all of the challenges that face the next generation going into healthcare, the ethical challenges, the burnout rates. I'm really convinced that the formation of them as people of virtue, ones who develop solid habits of the heart, where they learn to listen to God, to think clearly, those sorts of things, they're the kind of things that will enable them to be the bearers of the gospel in the next generation. So I've sort of taken the approach of reading great books together, and some are related to formation of the heart, like Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, which comes out of the Dallas Willard, The Disciplines of a Godly Man. I'm reading it with another student. Disciplines and Formation of the Mind. You can see The Cost of Discipleship by Bonhoeffer. Why Liberalism Failed. Some students wanted to read T.S. Eliot's poetry. And then Formation Missionally. You can see No God But One, which is by Nabil Qureshi, understanding some of the differences between Islam and Christianity. And then you can also see, perhaps there's a biography of Muhammad there for students who are interested in careers in medical missions. So getting together for discussions, for talks, for processing, for learning to form ourselves as followers of Jesus has been a real delight for Crystal and me. We've also had fun activities, and some of those have been overnight camping on the James, Christmas party, graduation events, making music, talking around the fire pit. It's been great fun to be with students. Also, we've been part of the Global Missions Virtual Health Conference this year that was in November. So this is the largest medical missions conference in the world. So we got together as a group, socially distanced, and looked at that conference together and processed it as a group. But it's been a real delight to be part of this ministry, and I'm so grateful to God for the support of our council that has allowed that to happen. So I want to introduce next 2 student speakers. One is our first year student president, and that's Jacob Beeman, and the next is Haesung Kang, who is a surgery resident at VCU. Jacob.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Jacob, and I'm going to be serving as the president for CMDA, or co-president for CMDA this year. Just a little bit about myself. So I grew up in North Carolina with actually pretty much all over the South. So if you ask where I'm from, if you list any state from the South, you'll probably say where I've been. Actually, I grew up Catholic, and then eventually started to branch out into a lot of different denominations and seeing what each denomination believes. And it was actually in high school when I started to really ask myself a lot of these kind of existential questions. And I think that that's when I really had a coming to Christ. And that is, I feel like, where my faith journey really began. And since then, I've had a lot of mentors who have brought me up and have taught me a lot of the things that or taught me how to go through the Bible and what I believe now. So, anyways, I've from high school I went to VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, and now I plan on, or now here I am at a VCU, and I plan on going into the military as an Army doctor, and then one day as a medical missionary. Yeah, so I think that's mostly about myself, who I am. I think, hey, Song.
Hello, my name is Hae Song. I'm one of the surgery residents at VCU Health. Just to give you a little background for myself, I moved to Richmond about 8 years ago for med school, went to med school here. And so I've been part of CMDA for about 8 years or so. I've been asked to share as a resident, what it's been like to be part of CMDA. And what I wanted to focus on was the relationships and the wonderful relationships I've had with people over the 8 years. Really faithful men and women of God whom I really look up to, and mentorship. And that's been so important in my life for the past 8 years. Dr. Armistead, whom I've met with past 6 years, weekly to biweekly, which is incredible. And he's seen my lowest and the highest during this journey. To Dr. Angus, whom I can talk to about finances, to whom I look up to for just overcoming adversities. I love these guys, and I try to absorb as much as I can from them whenever I can, and really look to them for counsel. So what I want to say was I really recommend students to take advantage of these people whom God has surrounded you with, to reach out to them and to learn from them and to soak up some wisdom from them. They're all very godly and they have a lot to offer, even outside of medicine, just terms of life. I've learned a lot and grown a lot. So.
I think you're muted, John.
Good evening. I'll tell you, seeing all those smiling faces and the enthusiasm of the students and those who've spoken so far makes me really miss being together. So I'm going to depart from a little bit of my prepared text here for a moment, just to tell the students, we used to meet with you on Thursday nights. We had meals together for many years, and suddenly, because of our age and our reticence about being around possible COVID exposure, that's not been possible. But our prayers are still with you, and we're still hoping that Scott and Crystal give you the kinds of experiences you're looking for as you work through those hard years of the graduate schools you're in. So thank you for being a part of us. My next comments are to welcome you and acquaint you with the activities of the graduate regional chapter of the National Association as it exists here in Richmond. As I look back over 2020, there are many things that I think are significant developments in the life of our local chapter. It's been a privilege to serve with a council of fellow Christian healthcare professionals in carrying out our work to serve Richmond. When I call people and ask them if they can do this or that, they all say yes. It makes my job so easy. And I'm really appreciative of their dedication to Christ first in their lives, and then to our council and to our community. Our mission is primarily to support and serve the young healthcare professionals as they come to Richmond for their education. This effort has enjoyed the strong support of Dr. Scott Armstead, who you just met. He's a family practice physician down at VCU, spent many years in Pakistan as a missionary. And then he's helped by Dr. Crystal Maddox, who's a dentist. She's been assisting him in those duties for a number of years now. And one of her accomplishments in 2020 was to oversee and get some housing, some Christian housing for the students. So 2 houses were located in Church Hill. Two ladies who are part of our fellowship live in one house, and 3 of the guys live in the other. And these houses are close together, and they serve as a focal point and a meeting place for many of the student activities. The council has sponsored 2 ethics conferences in this past year, one in the spring and one in the fall. These focused on current ethical issues facing healthcare professionals. And our concern in this area prompted our asking Far Curlin to speak later this evening on how we might live out our convictions in the 21st century. 2020 also brought into focus many challenges, one of which was the new attention at the very negative role that racism has played within our society and right here locally in Richmond. A committee of our council members, again, very eager to serve, organized a fall series of 8 lectures led by local Richmond clergy and spiritual leaders, focusing on ways that we as Christians can support our racial reconciliation, And we want to begin working toward a more equitable system of justice. I will also remind you that our ethics conferences, events, and our racial reconciliation presentations are available for your review under the events tab at CMDA Richmond, that's all one word, cmdarichmond.org. And there'll be a slide showing that address at the end of the presentations tonight. During the last legislative session almost a year ago, or about a year ago, many of our chapter made appearances downtown before legislative members to lobby for rights of conscience. If you tuned into our fall ethics series, you may have heard Dr. James Avery. He's a pulmonologist from Virginia, and I bring him up tonight because he spoke on marijuana, both a very balanced talk, both on its medical uses and its hazards as a recreational drug. And once again, it looks as if our General Assembly is looking very favorably upon marijuana legalization. You should listen to his talk at cmdarichmond.org and prepare yourself to be able to address why you would oppose marijuana legalization for recreational purposes. I'm all for eliminating the arrests and charges for possession of marijuana because those rules have been applied so unevenly across the races, and I think they're very divisive. They've involved incarceration of minors, where I suspect most of you don't know of any frat boy or affluent white neighborhood kids who've ever been arrested for possessing marijuana. The thing that Dr. Avery points out in his lecture is that no pulmonologist would recommend you take medication by smoking it. The marijuana that's out there right now has 15 to 20 times the THC, that's the active ingredient, has 15 to 20 times the content of the marijuana that might have been smoked 50 or 60 years ago at Woodstock. So it's a much more dangerous drug. At these levels of THC, it can lead to psychosis. It can lead to making pregnancies difficult. And it's certainly a concern that for some people, it will be a gateway drug to harder substances. Also in 2020, our local chapter made significant revisions to our Constitution. One of the things driving this is that we wanted to make every one of you aware that we are open to members of any sort. The national chapter, whose recommendations we adopted, recognizes 5 groups of people. Number 1 is the students of all the healthcare professions. 2 is residents and fellows. 3 are graduate physicians and dentists. 4 are all allied healthcare professionals. And 5 is any non-medical person who has an interest in carrying out the work and the mission of serving Christ's kingdom alongside of us who are professionals within medicine. I would invite you to talk to me. Think about becoming a national and a local CMDA member. And if you'd like to be on the CMDA Richmond Council, we only meet once a month at 6 o'clock in the morning. Don't mean to scare you off, but at 6 o'clock in the morning, the third Wednesday of the month. We'd be happy to have you join. I now would like to introduce Eric Edwards from our local council to discuss the national organization where he serves as a trustee. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the presence of two persons. One is Bill Reichert, who serves as Vice President of Campus and Community Ministries in the National Bristol, Tennessee office. And Tom Grosh. Tom's our CMDA Northeast Regional Director. He attends nearly all of our Wednesday morning meetings. Both of these men provide for great oversight and accountability within our local chapter. And they're very valuable resources for us in local leadership. So I want to thank you, Tom and Bill, for being on tonight and for supporting us in all the ways that you do. And now, Dr. Eric Edwards.
Hi, good evening. And it is a pleasure, and I'm thrilled to see many of you all virtually. And it's been a while since I've been able to commune with the CMDA Council, and it's great to see so many students and residents who are in attendance. It's been a busy day, and it's been a busy day because we're in the middle of a national board meeting. So we have a 2-day strategic planning and board meeting going on right now. So it started at 7 this morning and it ended right at 6:30 p.m. So the good news is what's happening nationally is fresh in my mind. So I can give you a pretty good update. It is one of the most humbling and amazing experiences. First and foremost, starting off as a student at VCU, and then being mentored and loved on by so many of you, and under the leadership of Ed and Debbie, participating in so many events, and my wife being ministered to and side by side, but also then just having the honor of representing on the National Board of Trustees for I think this is my 6th year. It has been an amazing experience. Crystal knows what an amazing organization this is. Some of the most godly men and women that I've ever encountered in my life, and by far the best run board I've ever been a part of, and I've been a part of many. There are a lot of things going on with the National Board. The good news is that even in the midst of COVID, there have been so many blessings that have been poured out on this organization to allow the national organization to be resilient and to sustain the organization, even financially. In fact, we ended the fiscal year with the largest surplus in donations that we've ever had in history. From 2006 to 2020, there's been a change in membership from 17,500 to close to 20,000 members. That's not a huge increase in membership. So one of the goals of this strategic planning session was try to figure out, where do we want to be in 5 years? How do we grow? How do we become even more relevant, especially for those key transition points in a student's life, right? So when you get engaged as students with the CMDA, you have transition point 1, which is from medical school and that local campus community ministry to residency. And then there's a transition point 2 from residency to practice. And then you have those early growth years. So how can we better minister to students and residents is a key topic as a part of this strategic planning. The number of CMDA campus groups continues to grow. We are now over 300. We had 284 last year, and in 2020, we added an additional 16. We're serving 328 medical, dental, and other healthcare professional schools throughout the United States of America, and now have over 90 graduate groups and 96 side-by-side chapters. So there, even though the membership has been slow, the number of campus and community ministries has continued to grow year over year. Most importantly, we are on the front lines continuing to fight for conscience protections. In fact, the CMDA will appeal the decision blocking the Trump administration's conscience rule. There's so much going on, as you can appreciate, with the changing dynamics across this country. There are a lot of challenges that medical students are going through, and many of you all have experienced that just in the past year. We know that our brother Scott has been on the front lines, and we at the national organization are praying for those local leaders and for you as students as you continue to face these challenging situations. We're here for you, and we're here to be a resource. One of the things that I'm very excited about that we've been talking at the strategic planning as it deals with technology and relevance, and we're using technology right now to even come together in this banquet, is how to engage. And we are getting ready to launch an exciting new app called CMDA Go that will be available in the App Store. The beta version's already in there, but the full launch is going to happen February 14th, so just a couple weeks away. In there, it will have news feeds on relevant issues relating to CMDA. There'll be different chat forums. There'll be resources at your fingertips. It will be a one-stop shop to see what events are upcoming. And there'll be a complete member directory. So there's going to be additional functionality added over time, but we're now finally going to get to that point where we have a modernized, very relevant app that we hope will serve you all well as you go through this continued journey. Whether you're a student, resident, or a practitioner, this is going to be a fantastic resource for everyone. The CMDA National Convention is still planning to take place April 24th through May 2nd, 2021 at Ridgecrest this year. So we are going to be hosting it physically. There will be virtual opportunities. So COVID-19 will obviously impact some of that physical capacity at some of the sessions. So stay tuned as this unfolds. Like many events, it's a very dynamic situation, and we will be keeping you all up to date. Please check back on the website frequently, and then there'll be email communications. CMDA Podcast Network was launched and continues to grow in content. And if you haven't checked that out, please do. It's cmda.org/podcasts. On here are links to CMDA channels for CMDA Matters, the Dental Soundbites channel, Healthy Doctor channel, Let's Go GHO, which is a mission-based channel, and the Student Pulse podcast channels. There's a ton of fantastic content on there already, and we encourage you all to check that out if you haven't already. In the spring 2021 issue of CMDA Today, there's going to be an entire section just on ethical issues of vaccines with focus on COVID-19. So that's a highly relevant topic, and I encourage you to check that out. And finally, the CMDA recently launched a church commission that is focusing on bridging the gap between the CMDA as an organization and our local church and communities. We've often, for actually many years now, discussed how can CMDA's brand be more prevalent? How can we partner with churches and organizations to help them encounter and bridge that gap between medical science and then those ethical issues and some of the things that pastors have to deal with. So whether it's beginning of life issues or end of life concerns or congregational members dealing with challenges in sexuality, gender, addiction, rights of conscience, we're going to be a resource to them and start partnering with the church. And I find that to be a very, very exciting thing that will help us have even more influence throughout this country. So there's many, many things I can continue to update you all on, but that's some of the highlights that are really impacting the campus and community ministries. Most importantly, I'm here as a resource for you all as well, and encourage you, if you haven't gone ahead to check out CMDA and becoming a national member, please do. We have a lot of resources for you all. Scott will be providing information on how we deal with waiving dues, and there's a lot of support here as you go through these transitions. Most importantly, there's just unbelievable men and women who are healthcare professionals who have so much wisdom to offer, mentorship, coaching, and can help you as you are dealing with the different journeys in your life, young and old. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and it's just a pleasure being and communing with you this evening.
Thank you, Eric. We appreciate your involvement both at the local level and at the national level. What a gift we have in so many folks who are so involved and have been for many years. I am going to introduce Dr. Far Curlin. who is our speaker for tonight. He's the Josiah C. Trent Professor of Medical Humanities in the Trent Center for Bioethics, Humanities, and History of Medicine, and the co-director of the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative at Duke Divinity School. That's called the TMC, Theology, Medicine, and Culture. Before moving to Duke in 2014, he founded and was co-director of the program on medicine and religion at the University of Chicago. At Duke, Dr. Kurlan practices palliative medicine and works with colleagues in the Trent Center and in the Divinity School to develop opportunities for education and scholarship at the intersection of theology, medicine, and culture. He's interested in the moral and spiritual dimensions of medical practice, particularly the doctor-patient relationship, the moral and professional formation of physicians, and the practices of care for patients at the end of life. I first came to know of Dr. Kurlan when one of the students, who is now a third-year student, Brian Engelhardt, I think he might be on tonight. He began medical school, and he told me about this theology, medicine, and culture program, which he had done. It was a spiritual and professional and moral formation year that he did at Duke before coming to VCU as a medical student. And he has been an incredible asset to me, both in the friendship we've developed and in sharing the ideas that he learned during his year there with me and with the group here at VCU. So we're so grateful for Dr. Kurlan for your work in mentoring and investing in students through that program. Dr. Kurlan has published many articles. One that I read recently is called Just Do Your Job, Technology, Bureaucracy, and the Eclipse of Conscience in Contemporary Medicine. Ed Reed spoke about an article that he published some years ago called Strangers or Friends, a proposal for a new spirituality in medicine ethic. There are all sorts of incredible essays online that you can search and read and sort of enjoy his thinking. So we are delighted tonight to hear Dr. Kurlan speak about the way of medicine for Christians.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. It's good to be with you guys, albeit virtually. I had hoped to be with you in the flesh, but Lord willing, that time will come in the not too distant future. My talk tonight builds on a book that my colleague Chris Tollefson and I have written, and which will be published this August. The title of the book is The Way of Medicine, Ethics and the Healing Profession. And you can pre-order it from Amazon or other booksellers even now. So I don't discourage you from doing that. I'll give you a sneak preview of the argument we develop in the book, with particular focus on what kind of relationship physicians have with patients. And then I'll take a deeper look at the difference that Christianity can, and I believe should make for this relationship. So medical practitioners and those who want to become practitioners face some basic questions. What is medicine? What is medicine for? What does it mean to be a good doctor? Their answers seem essential to the practice of medicine and to understanding its moral norms. The absence of answers to these questions, or incoherent or incorrect answers, would seem to prefigure a crisis for both medicine and medical ethics. For without correct and coherent answers, practitioners of medicine cannot properly orient themselves within their profession, nor even think of their practice as a profession at all. We believe that medicine, and hence medical ethics, is in precisely this sort of crisis in our time. Medicine has lost its way because it lacks clarity about where the way should lead. We no longer have a shared public understanding of what medicine is for, of what the end of medicine is or should be. Rather, medicine has substituted for its once clearly recognized purpose something amorphous, subjective, and shadowy. And as a consequence, the norms that medical professionals and professional ethicists bring to the practice of medicine are now devoid of objective content and radically deficient for guiding doctors and protecting patients. According to what we call the provider of services model, medicine refers to a set of technical possibilities, what we call healthcare services, which clinicians provide for the sake of patient well-being. Every culture gets the medical practice it deserves, and in our culture, medical practice is dominated by a consumerist understanding, where well-being is understood in terms of the patient's desires being satisfied. That is, the patient is the one who determines what well-being is for him or her. Efforts to identify an ethical framework capable of guiding practitioners and patients in our consumerist culture have resulted in consequentialism, contractarianism, and most prominently, the system we're all familiar with, principalism. It's that framework that gives us the familiar 4 principles of medical ethics. In the context of an individualist and consumerist environment, however, these efforts all tend to default to 3 norms: what the law permits, what's technologically possible, and what the patient wants. Thus, according to the provider of services model, if an intervention is permitted by law, is technologically possible, and is autonomously desired by the patient, medical practitioners should provide the intervention. Indeed, they may be professionally obligated to do so. In this way, in the provider of services model, the work of physicians becomes demoralized. Its ethic becomes what the late philosopher now, Tris Engelhardt, has identified as a morality of strangers. Medical ethics reduces to a set of procedures for negotiating non-interference with patients' wishes to the greatest possible extent. And among the many consequences of this provider of services model, the following 3 loom. First, professional authority has steadily eroded. If there's no objective standard or end for medicine, physician expertise is merely technical. Thus, instead of exercising the authority of expertise within a sphere constituted by our professional commitments, we clinicians come to work in a highly regulated domain in which the exercise of clinical judgment and prudence is neither possible nor desirable. It's no surprise then that declining professional authority is followed by a second consequence, a crisis of medical morale. Insofar as medicine merely provides desired services, its pretense of moral seriousness is a charade, and its attempts at professionalism are a facade. Is it surprising that physicians who experience themselves largely as mere functionaries, asked to set aside traditional medical norms, religious convictions, and their best judgment, suffer high rates of burnout? Finally, when medicine is understood as the provision of healthcare services, the physician's judgment, and particularly the exercise of physician conscience, is treated as the intrusion of private or personal concerns into transactions that should be governed by physicians' professional commitment to provide legally permitted services to patients who request those services. As a result, the medical profession and the society at large appear increasingly ready to abandon the idea of the conscientious physician and to use the coercive powers of the profession and the state to compel physicians to participate in practices that violate norms that have guided medical practitioners for millennia. Now, a full history of what we call the provider of services model goes beyond the scope of tonight's talk. But in his book, To Relieve the Human Condition, the theologian Gerald McKinney traces the provider of services model's roots to the writings of René Descartes and Francis Bacon. Bacon, who you may recall is known as the father of modern science, was an Anglican Christian. And he saw in modern science the means to, quote, relieve and benefit the condition of man, end quote, by reducing suffering and expanding the realm of human choice, ostensibly noble goals. Unfortunately, as McKinney observes, this imperative to relieve suffering and expand choice finds in contemporary culture no larger framework of meaning in which to discern which suffering should be relieved and which choices should be accommodated. In the resulting moral vacuum, medicine comes to relieve any condition that an individual experiences as a burden. Maximizing choice becomes the default. What McKinney calls the Baconian project takes the human body to be without any given purpose or end, any telos, without what Aristotle called a final cause. Jeffrey Bishop, in his book, The Anticipatory Corpse, traces out how modern medicine was birthed historically, and he argues that the loss of a teleological understanding of the body, which means an understanding of the body as having a given end, an end toward which it is aimed, a clear, that there is a way for the body to be what it is made to be. It's not just matter. The loss of that kind of understanding produced a medicine that treats the body as so much matter in motion, and death as simply the end of that motion. In Bishop's account, contemporary medicine has come to have no purpose except that which is given to it post hoc through the choices of those who are socially empowered to do so. In our era, autonomous individuals. If an individual chooses to use medicine in a certain way, to manipulate their body in some way, or even to cause their own death, the choosing itself is taken to make that use of medical technology ethical. So what is our alternative vision for medicine? We call it the way of medicine. In it, medicine is a paradigmatic practice elevated to a profession because of its social importance that aims at human health. Health is an objective, natural norm for any organism, the well-functioning of that organism as a whole. Human health is also an objective human good. Our organic well-functioning is an aspect of our human flourishing. So understood in this twofold way, health gives singular purpose to the practice of medicine. The provider services model also concerns itself with health. No one, to our knowledge, denies the importance of health to the practice of medicine. But under the provider of services model, health is only a subjective and socially constructed concept. Therefore, the norm of health is sufficiently malleable to justify pursuing almost any desired bodily condition. In contrast, in the way of medicine, the good physician need only pursue those aims related to health objectively construed, and must resist inducements to act in ways that contradict the good of health. This commitment dates back to Hippocrates, at least, and the promise the physician makes in the Hippocratic Oath to give no deadly potion nor cause an abortion, no matter how much the physician is implored to do so. In the way of medicine, physicians are always justified in refusing to intentionally damage or destroy the good of health. Physicians devote themselves to health, not in the abstract, of course, but in the particular vulnerable persons who present to them for care, while mindful that health is not the only good for such persons, nor are these patients the only ones in need. So it's necessary, but not sufficient for physicians to focus on the health of their patients. They must also pursue their patients' health in ways that respect the broader demands of ethics or morality or practical reason. These terms can be used interchangeably. Put differently, the practice of medicine has its own integrity, but that integrity depends on and is accountable to the requirements of practical reason. The requirements of practical reason have been known under a number of names. One is natural law. C.S. Lewis identified another name, the Tao, as a synonym for practical reason and natural law, which he described as the source of all value judgments. These various names point to the same reality. Practical reason identifies that which is genuinely good for human beings, that is, conducive genuinely to human flourishing, and the corollary implications as to what we should do and how we should live. Practical reason identifies several goods as giving human persons fundamental and basic reasons for action. Friendship, knowledge, and health are three such goods. We're better off as individuals and in community if we have friends, if we have knowledge, and if we are healthy. The goodness of these is what philosophers call basic. That is, we can reasonably seek these for their own sakes, not just as means to other ends. You can seek friendship with someone just to have a friend, not only because that opens up doors to other things. Practical reason forbids us to intentionally damage or destroy any basic human goods, including the good of health. Because these are just good, it's never reasonable to intentionally destroy them. And here we find that the internal norms of the practice of medicine are strongly confirmed by what practical reason requires. How, though, should you or I organize our pursuit of the human goods? Now, we could simply pursue human goods serially, acting for the sake of this good now, of that good then, in accordance with whatever seems appropriate and desirable in any situation. Yet, our life would then be both shallow and chaotic in ways that are, I think, clearly detrimental to our flourishing. So we need something like a rational life plan to guide our pursuit of the various human goods available to us. But this language of rational life plan seems to suggest that we have the power, through a firm will and expert planning, to author our lives as we see fit. But surely that's a mistake. Yes, we are in some sense the authors of our own lives through our choices, our commitments, and our actions. Yet much also is outside our control. Things happen to us. And living well depends on, depends on responding well to such happenings. The notion of a rational life plan also fails to capture the way in which many of us believe we have been called to the particular shape of our lives in a manner that was in some sense beyond our control. On this understanding, one may be called to be a doctor rather than simply deciding to be one. Although the concept of calling has roots in Christianity, today majorities of US physicians from diverse religious affiliations use the term to describe their practice of medicine. This should not surprise us, I think, in light of the kind of good that health is. For health, like knowledge or friendship, is good for all human beings, regardless of whether or not it is wanted by them. Moreover, health is a good of such breadth and depth that one can pursue it in countless different ways and explore its meaning and potential for all time. Health is also a good which serves as a necessary condition for the pursuit of all other goods. And so, faced with such a good, even non-religious persons may find that this good calls out to them, inviting them to a lifetime of service to health in the patients they will encounter. I'll turn now to two essential concepts for the way of medicine: solidarity and trust. Solidarity and trust are features of any flourishing community, including the community formed between doctor and patient. Humans can only reach their fulfillment in community, and genuine community, including that formed between a doctor and her patient, requires its members to will and to act for each other's goods. This firm and enduring commitment to the good of other persons in one's community or communities we call solidarity. So the way of medicine requires the physician to show solidarity toward her particular patients, to be firmly and concretely committed to her patient's good. But how can the patient have solidarity with the doctor, since the purpose of the doctor-patient relationship is to pursue the patient's good? The answer here, we think, is simple but important. Patients should will the doctor's good in the way that patients can, which is to will that their doctor be a good doctor in all the relevant and necessary ways. The patient wills this not simply so that the patient will be cured. She might be, she might not be, even with the best doctoring. But the patient wills this because being a good doctor is good for the doctor. Through practicing good medicine, the doctor flourishes and finds fulfillment as a human person. Of course, physicians can and do fail in solidarity toward their patients. We can readily think of the doctor who's just in it for himself, who regularly puts his patient's good behind other concerns, maybe some time at the golf course, the demands of an insurance company, or the financial incentives of the healthcare system which employs him. These are obvious failings. But here are two less obvious failures of solidarity to which physicians are also prone. First, physicians fail to show solidarity when they concern themselves with health without concerning themselves for the patient. As we see in the surgical operating room, efficiency and effectiveness are often served by treating the patient like an object that is subject to scientific investigation and technical control. The problem emerges when such treatment is not governed by an overarching commitment to this patient's good. Then patients often report that they were treated like an object. This tendency is exacerbated by medical subspecialization, which habituates physicians to focus only on the diseased or defective parts of the patient, rather than on the patient as a whole. Patients also often report that they were treated like a number, reflecting a tendency for physicians to service as many bodies as possible in the allotted time, often in order to maximize efficiency and profit. Each of these tendencies, while overtly pursuing health, fails to show the solidarity physicians owe to their patients. Second, physicians fail to show solidarity with patients when they deny the possibility of knowing the patient's real, objective good. And therefore, they reduce the patient's good to that which the patient desires and autonomously chooses, to mere subjective well-being. In such an approach, which characterizes the provider of services model, physicians and patients do not share a genuine good in common, and so there can be no genuine solidarity and community between them. So the logic of the provider of services model undermines the doctor-patient relationship. This portrait of the doctor-patient relationship as a community, however, raises a worry that doctors will fail to respect the boundaries appropriate to the kind of relationship they share with patients. Yes, physicians are concerned for the good of the patient, but surely the patient's good includes much that is not the doctor's business. There's a middle path, we think, between the detached posture that treats the patient as an object with whom one has no solidarity, and the enmeshed mode that, in service to being holistic, makes it the physician's business to care about everything that matters to the patient. Patients are living bodily beings. And so the physician who attends to a patient's health, a characteristic of the body as a whole, thereby attends to the patient as a person, even if the physician focuses only on this one dimension of the patient's personal existence. The same is true in other social contexts. Teachers' concern for their students is somewhat limited. It typically does not extend to the student's home life, for example, but good teachers nonetheless are concerned for the good of their students as persons. Because the physician ultimately cares for the patient, at times that care cannot be confined merely to the good of health. Just as at times a teacher's care for a student cannot be confined to the good of knowledge. And so sometimes physicians will reasonably meet a patient's request for marital advice or spiritual counsel or urgent assistance in some other domain. Prudence is needed for physicians to discern when such actions complement the physician's vocational purpose, seeking the patient's health, and when they might interfere with or problematically distract from that purpose. The provider of services model, interestingly, has no way of distinguishing between and ordering these two kinds of actions, because it does not distinguish actions oriented to health from actions oriented to other aspects of patient well-being. This brings us to the importance of trust between physicians and patients. Classically, the professions respond to particular vulnerabilities faced by individuals. For priests, the vulnerability of human persons before God and in the face of sin and death. For lawyers, the vulnerability of those faced with the mechanisms of the law and the threat of injustice. And for physicians, the vulnerability of those threatened by injury, illness, and death. Such vulnerabilities call for trust on the part of the vulnerable and trustworthiness on the part of those caring for them. Solidarity is so important for the practice of medicine because in order for physicians to help patients, patients must be able to trust their physicians. It might seem that patients have no choice but to trust their physicians because they often are not in control of when and how they come under the physician's care. But there's a difference between trust and reliance. We rely on something when we simply count on it. And sometimes we count on something when we have no other choice in the matter. Moreover, relying on is not something that requires a personal relationship. You rely on your car, but you don't trust it. Thus, you don't feel betrayed when it conks out, or at least you shouldn't unless you're anthropomorphizing it. Trust, by contrast, entails having faith in someone, having confidence that they will act toward you in ways that are governed by genuine concern. Patients certainly rely on doctors, on their technical skills, their showing up during clinic hours, their billing tools, and doctors can prove reliable in all of these and other respects without ever caring about their patients as persons. But such doctors cannot be called trustworthy, and they can have no genuine community with their patients. That the absence of trust undermines the doctor-patient relationship indicates again that the practice of medicine requires a relationship of solidarity, at least according to the way of medicine. In this final section, I'm going to expand this account of the way of medicine in light of Christian faith. Much more can be said here. And on behalf of my colleagues in the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative at Duke Divinity School, we sincerely encourage anyone in this meeting to consider studying with us, to dig into the storehouses of Christian wisdom that can renew your vision for medicine. We have, as Scott mentioned, Brian Engelhardt is an alum of our full-time fellowship that trainees can participate in with 1 or 2 years whenever they can take a break during their medical training. But we also are launching this fall a flexible certificate in theology and healthcare that you could participate in right where you are. It only requires coming to the Duke Divinity School for 1 week in August and 1 week in January. So consider joining us for that. This evening, however, I will look at 3 ways in which the doctor-patient relationship should be changed by the fact that the doctor is a Christian. First, the Christian physician's practices will reflect the ultimate telos, the ultimate end or purpose of the doctor-patient relationship. The physician's vocation is to attend to health, which is threatened or damaged in particular patients. That, we might call that constitutive vocational commitment, is expressed in the solidarity with the patient that forms the core of the physician's orientation toward the patient. This solidarity is the source of the trustworthiness of the good physician. Now, many secular physicians could and should share this vocational commitment and have precisely this form of solidarity and trustworthiness, but its horizon for the secular physician is clearly imminent. Its telos, its end, is limited to an earthly and therefore a finite fellowship with the patient. The Christian physician, however, must see herself as ultimately called not by either the good of the health in the abstract, nor even the good of health in this particular person, but called by God to minister to this particular person's health as part of and in pursuit of friendship with God. This call will be understood as mediated through Jesus Christ, friendship with whom is a real human good, for Jesus is man. Yet, since Jesus also is God, this friendship also radically transcends what is available to human nature. In Jesus, the physician finds a friend and guide who opens up an opportunity to participate in the eternal life of the triune God. From this standpoint, everything that the physician does with and for the patient is also done for the sake of friendship with Jesus, for the sake of his heavenly kingdom, and for the sake of life with the triune divinity of Father, Son, and Spirit. Moreover, everything that is done cooperatively with Jesus in accordance with his will. So Jesus must be understood as both the end or the fulfillment of the healing practice and as a partner in that healing practice. This leads to a claim made by many Christian physicians, namely that they seek and find Christ in their patients. This does not instrumentalize that relationship to the patient, but rather deepens it. For Christ cares that the physician cares for the patient, precisely because Christ himself cares for both the patient and the physician. The physician who loves what Jesus loves will thus love the patient for the patient's own sake and for the physician's own sake. And in doing so, will see Jesus and love Jesus in the patient. So even prior to any outward change, this deepened understanding of the Christian vocation clearly changes the nature of doctoring. The Christian physician always understands that practice as involving divine cooperation over which she has no control, as guided by divine providence into which she has little insight, and as stewardship for God's creation over which she has little mastery. The Christian physician's task is radically reframed as one of service to others for their own sake, but also for the sake of God. And this cannot but affect a reorientation and reshaping of the physician's character, especially in terms of virtues such as humility, patience, and respect for the goodness of God's creation. So even if not accompanied by categorically different behaviors, medicine practiced by Christians is carried out by categorically different persons. But there will be some concrete behavioral differences, even if not all are visible. One difference concerns the role of prayer. Now, what I say here may seem obvious, but in this case, I think the obvious bears stating. First, physicians who understand themselves to be called by God must practice discernment. They must seek to discern what God is calling them to be and do. And this discernment requires communication. In other words, prayer. Christian physicians will pray to discern what God calls them to in calling them to be physicians, as well as what God calls them to do for their particular patients in their particular circumstances. Physicians also must pray for their patients. That's part of solidarity with patients. Physicians should pray not only for their patients' earthly good, and especially their patients' healing, but also for their spiritual good. For example, physicians should pray that their patients resist temptations and that they put their souls in order. Under many circumstances, Christian physicians should also pray with their patients. Sometimes patients will ask their physicians to pray with them, and Christian physicians should readily agree to do so. Sometimes physicians should initiate the offer to pray together. This will be more obvious if and when the patient is more obviously a Christian, him or herself. But in our view, the Christian physician should be willing to take some risks, to offer to pray for or with patients whose religious commitments perhaps are opaque. The Christian physician is first a Christian, and Christianity is an evangelical religion. Christians possess a truth that saves and heals, and healing is the physician's task. So even with a patient who is clearly not a believer, a Christian physician may sometimes offer to pray for the patient, so long as they do so with respect. And I will say that it's in practicing doing so and taking the risk to do so that one develops the practical wisdom to know how to do that well. Finally, I'll briefly discuss how Christianity changes the relationship of the physician to her patient's suffering. Again, much more could and should be said here. And again, if you come study with us, you will find that Christians through the centuries have offered really remarkable reflections, extraordinarily deep reflections on how we respond to suffering. Unfortunately, a few hundred years at least of Christian legalism have made it difficult for many of us to see that there is an intrinsic connection between morality or ethics and human well-being. In our time, it seems to many that so-called moral laws are merely rules imposed arbitrarily by those in power. It's not clear why one should comply with such rules if one can get away with not doing so. But a natural law approach to morality, best developed, for example, by Thomas Aquinas, makes clear that the moral life protects and promotes human well-being. As such, I should say this is true also of just a straightforwardly biblical account of morality or ethics or righteousness, that to do rightly, to follow God's law, is to find one's own fulfillment. And as such, there's very good reason to be moral if one wants to be genuinely happy, to flourish as a human being. But that reason often breaks down psychologically under extraordinary circumstances when the stakes are high. So for example, when a social order seems to be threatened, humans are often tempted to do what seems necessary as a last resort. Say, for example, historically, bombing innocent women and children to end a supreme emergency, so-called supreme emergency, or torturing human beings to find a ticking time bomb, or telling lies against another in order to save a nation. Similarly, when one's personal life is threatened by great suffering, then last resorts, such as physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, to say nothing of first resorts, such as abortion, become attractive despite the fact that they obviously contradict the basic good of human health, the very good at the heart of medicine. Christianity offers great hope in response to the question, how is morality or being moral possible in the face of extreme suffering? And Christianity's answers to this question are complex. Suffering is not pointless. In some cases, it is essential for growth in virtue and as an opportunity for grace. Further, suffering may be shared with Jesus, who offers to carry our burdens and to somehow make our sufferings contribute to the redemptive work of his own suffering. But perhaps most importantly, Christianity teaches that our suffering will be personally redeemed by God. That whatever evils we suffer, we nevertheless will be made whole in the end. And not just whole, but transfigured. Now, how this can be is a mystery, since our being made whole will not eliminate our past sufferings. I think it's extraordinary mystery that for all eternity, it will be true that Jesus suffered on the cross. And as the scriptures tell us, even his resurrected body has the marks of the nails. But somehow, Christians must believe and are given the grace to believe that their sufferings will be incorporated into a redeemed creation in such a way that the suffering itself will be redeemed. And thus a Christian doctor will believe this both of her patient's suffering and of her own. This gives the Christian physician a kind of heroic capacity to not turn to last resort options such as abortion and physician aid in dying, options that contravene the natural law and the gospel. In such cases, the Christian physician will resist these temptations while remaining present to the patient and to the reality of his or her suffering. The Christian physician then will demonstrate true compassion by continuing to suffer with the patient. Compassion has its secular shadow in the willingness to kill in order to eliminate suffering. But the Christian physician must be patient in the face of suffering, and in so doing, bear witness both to Christian charity and to Christian hope. All this is to say that for the Christian, being a good physician means detaching from the regnant provider of services model and embracing the way of medicine. But it also means setting the way of medicine within the transcendent frame of God's work to redeem and heal the world. In an increasingly secular world, practicing within this Christian frame will make the physician odd. Not because Christianity is somehow at odds with medicine, but because the world is forever taking that which God has made good, including the practices of medicine, and distorting them into something that contradicts human good and hinders human flourishing. In this, as in so many other cases, Christians are called to happily embrace the vocation of being odd, confident that they are doing so for the sake of good medicine and the good of the patients they serve. I'll stop there and be happy to take any questions or comments from you guys.
So there are several ways that you can participate in this question and answer session. You can put a question in the chat box, or if I see one of you raise your hand, I'll go to a gallery view here. And if you can raise your hand, I'll call on you, or Crystal and I will unmute your mic. Stephen Hughes.
Yes, Dr. Curlin, I was wondering if you might be willing to share maybe just practically maybe a positive and a negative example in your experience of what it would mean to take risks in initiative and initiating prayer with patient, where that went well and maybe where it was difficult.
Thank you. Let me say that we know from our research that very few doctors pray with patients very often. Only a small minority say they ever, well, a minority say they ever pray with patients. And we know from further research that those who think they do so often don't do so nearly as often as they think when they actually start to count it up. So I think a positive example is just particularly when a patient is obviously suffering or frightened, in that moment where you can share in the vulnerability that you don't have everything under control, asking them, hey, may I pray for you? Would you like me to pray for you? I have, in my experience, never had a patient respond to that negatively. Once or twice in the past 20 years, I've had someone say, no, thanks. But even that was not said with, with irritation. A negative way to do this, though, I think would be, and I've heard, I had a friend report this about a physician who cared for one of his good friends, and he was bothered by this, I think reasonably so. And that was the physician came in before a surgery and just started praying out loud, with laying hands on and praying out loud for the patient without asking permission. That's one example. Another example happened several years ago at the University of North Carolina, where some students, I forget the initial interaction, but circled back after rounds to at least, of course, maybe the story is actually not nearly so problematic, but to come back and share the gospel with a patient in a way that seemed to the people observed it to kind of get outside of their proper authority as medical students. So those are a couple of examples, but I'll just say that we live with the fear that people will be offended, and we live with a kind of cultural fear of that there are these ogres out there who whack people in the head with Bibles and are like the prison warden in Shawshank Redemption or something like that, and that we don't want to be anywhere close to that, so we tend to just keep our mouths shut. But the great majority of patients are welcome in any way to be treated like they're actual human beings. And asking, to pray with them is deeply appreciated by many.
Irving? You need to unmute yourself, Irving.
Bonnie will do that. I'm not technological.
Got it.
I would like to add on to what you just said. I've practiced 40 years, And when I mainly was a country doctor in Central Virginia, never had a patient not, when I would ask permission, pray with them. I spent 3 years on the faculty, family medicine at VCU. And there's one doctor I think that's on tonight that was a third year medical student that rotated through. And I had a lady who was a very difficult patient. And her rule was, I will never allow a student in the room. And I told her, you will allow this student in. And she said, why? I said, because she will be able to pray with you. And so the medical student went in, and the lady called me back in afterwards, the patient did. And she said, I will allow any medical student who will offer to pray with me to come in with you. So it was a gateway to her. She had been through more than any human being should ever have to endure. And she came mainly for the prayer.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a great further witness to that. And I'll just say, Scott mentioned, but if you guys are interested, I wrote an essay with a colleague several years ago called Strangers Are Friends, Proposal for a New Spirituality and Medicine Ethic. And we argue there, I think, in a way, a pretty airtight way, that there's this notion that there are these boundaries being crossed, but there really is no ethical problem with praying with patients, so long as the way you go about it is not hindering or getting in the way of your caring for them and their health. It's an area of freedom.
James? James?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Curlin. Thank you very much. Just asking your advice. We're definitely operating in the secular model of provider. And, with so much of the financial resources coming through government-based insurance, and the expectation that we'll just go along with the expectations of the patient to provide what they want, it definitely looks like we're heading for a crash landing on some of these bioethical issues or collision courses. And, we're not going to really capitulate to give up things that we know biblically are, just God's will, to value people and treat them with dignity. Yet we can't just give them, with some desire. Do you have any advice for us? I mean, the collision looks like it's getting set between the secular community coming down, whether it's the legislative arena or the healthcare arena through the medical schools. And it just looks like we're on a, head on a collision. Any advice you have for us, or just steady as you go? I mean, we're not ruined for a fight, but I think it's will be brought to our doorstep.
Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think the die is cast fully, or it's not. I'm not certain that it will go to the point of coercive power being used to either push doctors to either leave the profession of medicine or participate actively in killing their patients, for example. But it could get there. One can certainly see the pathway there, and we certainly seem to be moving further in that direction with the rise of the provider services model, such that it seems. I mean, I've been really struck and frankly disturbed over the past several years at how few medical students have any even interest in the reasons why one might not be enthusiastic about physician aid in dying, and how few are able to even engage in reasoning about the patient's good beyond a deference to the patient to say what their good is. So these things are pretty strong. And then of course you've got political movements to define things in such a way that, for example, the Obama rule that was then stayed by the Trump administration, and now the Trump administration staying, has been revoked by the Biden administration, defining any categorical refusal to participate in gender transition services as violating federal anti-discrimination law. I don't know what's going to happen. I think the preparation for us is to rejoice that we still have the freedom to worship God, and that that even if everything falls apart, God is still going to be for us. And things have fallen apart many times over history. And if there is, if things do fall apart again, it'll be an opportunity for us to trust God in a new way, know God in a new way, and bear more distinctive witness for the truth of who God is for us in Christ. So I mean that seriously. I think the preparation is to be prepared to be disliked, to be odd, to take heat, and don't go, as you were saying before, don't go picking fights that people haven't even started yet. But commit to being practicing good medicine, being unapologetic about that, which includes refusing to do things that are not consistent with the patient's health, and trust that the Lord will take care of us, whatever comes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Irving.
You're muted again, Irving.
All right, Bonnie's trying to get us unmuted.
Thank you, Bonnie.
All right. Can I springboard off of what James said? I know many of you there have heard me say when I was in Richmond that if it came down to me having to choose euthanasia or any of that, I would quit practicing medicine. And I'm in the twilight years anyway, I'm in my 70s, and I only work part-time, but I've been working here in South Carolina at a Christian urgent care center. And I read an article just a week or two ago where the gay community is targeting urgent care doctors coming in, demanding a prescription for the medication that will prevent them from getting HIV. And they have already brought some lawsuits against some doctors who refuse to do it. And what do you recommend we do in that situation? Because I know I would probably get sued because I would not do that.
I don't understand. There's a medication that prevents HIV, but doctors don't want to prescribe it.
There are several of them out there that you can take them prophylactically to greatly reduce your risk of getting HIV, and you can, quote, live your life the way you want to.
Oh, I see.
There are multiple ads for it now. I have never prescribed it and never will. But if they're targeting Christian urgent care doctors, that's going to present a problem.
Yeah, that would present a problem. I mean, probably it's a subject for a different conversation, but I would want to talk to you about why you wouldn't do that. Now, obviously you don't want to affirm or support patterns of life that are, you believe are not consistent with the person's good. But if unless the drug does something intrinsically wrong, if its purpose is to preserve health, namely prevent HIV, then I for one wouldn't have a trouble prescribing that.
Okay.
But the bigger issue is the one that, this is going to be tough. If people start, I mean, we've seen the kind of rise of people hunting out what they can do to kind of cancel someone. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of that, if people looking for, as they did with the Masterpiece Cake Shop, looking kind of setting up a chance to test these rules about non-discrimination. And of course, I think Christians, we have to be, as I try to be, forthright in explaining that we don't discriminate against people on the basis of their sexual orientation and so on with respect to practicing good medicine toward them. You know, if somebody's sick, we don't care what they are otherwise, except that they need healing. But that does not mean that we're going to use technologies to pursue something that's not related to health or even contradicts health because someone values that. And that's an important distinction we have to keep making and helping the public understand, even though some people are going to be determined not to understand that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question that follows up on your comments about young medical students and trends that you're seeing there. As fewer and fewer incoming medical students hold to a transcendent truth and don't understand what we as Christian physicians stand for, there seems to be a divide coming, because in my experience, patients seem to unconsciously, or maybe consciously, seek out physicians who are Christians because they see in that physician all the attributes that they want of somebody they're going to entrust their healthcare with. So how do those two emerging trends bode for the future?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's another area, that piece that Scott mentioned, just do your job, technology, bureaucracy, and the eclipse of conscience. We point out that maybe it was another piece I did with that same co-author, Jacob Blythe. But anyway, we point out that there's a incongruity between the rhetoric of wanting to accommodate diversity and then putting pressure on all the physicians to march to the beat of the same drum, or to just do their job, go to do whatever they're asked to do by patients, notwithstanding their own judgment that what's being asked of them contradicts their professional commitments. We point out that, just as you said, there are a lot of people who want a physician who, for example, there are a lot of people who are dying who don't want to be taken care of by someone that they know might be euthanizing people, every few days. There are a lot of people, I know this from our own research we did early in my, about 15 years ago, that there are people look for OBGYNs who have certain commitments regarding sexuality and reproduction. And clearly, a lot of people don't want to have an OBGYN who practices abortion ever. Those are reasons why, if one is committed to genuine diversity, you'd want to allow for physicians to practice in this forthright, contentful, particular way, so long as they're not out, intentionally hurting people. But these things are, people get triggered by the sense that they're being disrespected or called out or not accepted or not affirmed, and I think when people are arguing against doctors, for example, conscientiously refusing certain practices, they're just animated by what they see as a kind of bigotry. Even those people who are animated, when I have a chance to talk with them, colleagues in the university, they don't, in the end, most of them want you to be forced to do the thing you don't think you should do. They just think it's crazy that you feel that way.
Scott, thank you. Scott, I saw your hand.
Just trying to process or have you reflect a little bit on the body. We benefited this past summer from the Leon Cass article that I know you love, that says the goal or the end of medicine is the maintenance of and the restoration of the excellences of the body. So It's a very body-centered view of the goal of medicine, but yet we live in at least in primary care, we live in a medical world that just takes on everything. Yeah, and I think maybe as our social institutions and our families have disintegrated, things fall into the healthcare profession.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think, and then the WHO even defines health in such a massive way. So how do you process that? It makes sort of sense in an orthopedics view or a general surgeon but how do you process that deep respect for the body, but also the dynamic of holistic medicine, which we would see as Christians?
Yeah, I've had an essay that's been in mind. I've actually kind of half drafted it that is going to be titled something like Why Medicine Should Not Be Holistic. It'll be kind of tongue in cheek, but I think that another way to put it is the only hope for a shared profession and a plural culture is a medicine that's limited, that's humble. It does not offer to do everything, but instead offers to do something quite important, which is attend to the well-working of the body as a whole, this to preserve and restore health, as Leon Cast puts it. I think it puts it better than anyone has. That's a lot, and I think one of the problematic side effects of our efforts to be more than that. And we have such a kind of more than. We want to be more comprehensive. We want to be not just limited to the body. We don't want, we have all this kind of beyondism and more thanism within medical education, is that we're basically training students to think that if you're just a good doctor, if all you are is good at is healing people who are sick, you're only scratching the surface. You also need to be at the legislature. You need to be at the food pantry. You need to be advocating for housing policy. And if you're not, you're just not much. I think does a grave disservice to students, both because we don't have training that gives us any particular expertise in how to write a law to balance multiple public goods, including health, or frankly, how to do housing policy. But we do have training and expertise, and we do plausibly gain some extra knowledge that can be useful to others about how to attend to sick bodies, right? And seek their healing. So I think we have to just lock in on that. I will say when I practiced primary care medicine, I've been doing just hospice and palliative medicine for several years now, but when I practiced primary care medicine, I started talking this way and I found it really refreshing. And I think my patients found it refreshing. So I trained myself. I talked to my patients and I'd say things like, remember, I want to remind you, and let's remember together that as your doctor, my goal is your health. And here's how I understand your health. So whatever we're talking about, we're going to talk about it in terms of that. And I'm going to not, I'm going to care about you as a person, but I'm not going to presume to offer you well-being in all these different domains. I think patients themselves also find that refreshing, unless we're refusing something they really want. I think most people, most of the time, would be happy for their doctor to just focus on the main thing.
Well, Dr. Curlin, we really thank you for your time. I think our question and answer time has expired, and I'll call on Bill Angus to move to a closing. But I do want to say we will have some breakout rooms at the end of our time together here. So feel free to stay for a 10-minute breakout room. And after that, we'll just have an open session like we're doing now. And anyone who wants to do the fellowship that we normally have after our evening meal, I know you're getting sleepy because you had such a good meal tonight. But let's call on Bill Angus now.
John, I think the one thing that I missed was the meal as well. And, that's always a highlight. But I want everyone to know that the Richmond CMDA wants to thank everyone who has participated in tonight's virtual banquet, and especially to Dr. Curlin, whose talk was both encouraging, challenging, and inspiring us in the virtuous way of medicine. So we thank you, Dr. Curlin.
Amen.
And
you're welcome. You're welcome. And I just want to give a shout out to Brian. Good to see your face there, Brian Engelhardt.
Good to see you.
One of our alums. Thank you all for having me.
It's been our pleasure. Now, at the end of tonight's event, we'll be sending out a survey on tonight's program. And it would be very helpful if you would fill it out, because it'll help us improve our events in the future. And your comments are very important to us. The survey link will be posted in the chat room. a part that a lot of times we don't like to talk about, but something that's really critical, and that's giving to the ministry or donating to the ministry. You can see all the different things that the Richmond CDA is involved in. And our main mission is to support the student ministry and its leaders, Dr. Scott Armstead and Dr. Crystal Maddox. And we provide meals at their meetings and scholarships for CMDA conferences through the year. And one of the conferences we provide scholarships for is the Global Mission Health Conference in Louisville, Kentucky, which is the largest global mission health conference in the world. From these mission conferences, many of the students have been challenged to do short-term or long-term missions in medicine. You can help us by making a donation to the student ministry at cmda.org. Can you put that slide up on the screen? And
Yes.
or you can send it to the address of 11718 Heathmere's Crescent in Midlothian, as shown on the card. And we would greatly appreciate that. So we've got, now before we close in prayer, you'll have the opportunity to go to breakout rooms. And everyone has been assigned to a chat room where there will be a council member, and it will be a good time to ask questions about CMDA and the ministry in Richmond. In just a minute, there will be a slide showing the chat rooms with your name assigned to a room. So, John, do you have that ready?
I can do it after you're finished with your prayer, Bill.
Okay. So let us go before the Lord and thank him for what he has done here tonight. Gracious God and Heavenly Father, we thank you for what you have done in our hearts tonight. We thank you for the student ministry where we can affect the next generation of Christian healthcare professionals. We want to give you all the praise and glory for what you have done here tonight. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.